Hey, Francis, thanks for being here, man.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so glad we're doing this. Francis Rodriguez is the composer of American Thief, and my name is Michelle Stolnicki. I'm the writer-producer. Our film is coming out now in select theaters everywhere in the country, and we're also at virtual cinemas, so you can watch it at home, and you can just go to filmmovement.com and rent it from there, for only for limited time. So, Francis, can you tell us a little bit about who you are, your background, and how we got connected to do this film?
Sure. So my name Francis Rodriguez. I study music composition in a conservatory in Puerto Rico, which is where I'm originally from, San Juan, Puerto Rico. And I came to in 2006. I moved to New York. I study film scoring actually in NYU. I've been doing scores since pretty much then, maybe a little bit before I moved to New York. Um, and yeah, I've been working on a lot of short films, a lot of independent directors in here in New York, also in LA, and in Puerto Rico as well. And yeah, as working with being in the community of filmmakers here, that's how I met Miguel and also Michelle. So and that's how we got into American Thief.
We started this whole process in the fall of 2015. I think you came in like a year later. Yeah.
Yeah, probably because I remember that the film was like around 2 hours, and there was a
Yeah.
lot of material. There
Yeah.
was a lot of, and yeah, there was still editing happening. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, I do remember that then you guys shot like a couple of more things that but yeah, then the story kind of like started changing, which it it was a really good angle to for what the film ended up being. So.
Can you talk a little bit about this process, like how it started, like the first compositions and doing the score for the
Mhm.
film? What was like your like creative input? How did it all begin?
So I met first Miguel, and we got together. We watched back then what the film was kind of like in the way that it was developing, and just to kind of like have a sense of what sonically needed, right? Um, I had already a temp track that was kind of like at least serving in terms of emotionally what the film needed. But obviously, it needed a more um, the music needed to be more attached to the characters, more to the actual emotions that were happening. Rather, the temp track is always kind of like it's like a general way of capturing what you want there, right? So Miguel expressed that to me, like what is exactly that he wanted it to musically in terms of the scenes. Um, I remember I started with one of the I don't want to say so much about the scenes, right? But it was one of the kind of like the last scenes on the film. Um, and yeah, I remember asking him if there was a scene that he felt like would summarize the kind of like the sound of the film. Like if there's a scene specifically that he felt like, this is what we need to get to. This is it right
Hmm.
here.
Hmm.
So and that helped me a lot because I knew that this was kind of like, okay, this is the peak of what we need sonically, right? So what we'll do, I guess, in the other cues is more kind of like building to this.
Yeah.
So and that's how we started. We started with kind of like the peak scene, and then we kind of like work our way down into kind of like building for that moment. And and yeah, it was in the beginning. Miguel was just kind of like just let go and do what you want, which was really 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 cool because normally normally it doesn't work that way, right? I get a lot of restrictions in terms of the sound. He was actually very open in the way that he wanted me to approach this. So we did agree on a lot of things in terms of what we want sonically, like the kind of sounds that we wanted. um, it's kind of like this computer orchestra in a way. So we knew that it was going to involve a lot of synths, um, um, something that required me to do a lot of investigations in like old analog synthesizers and more modern ones like digital ones. So, but I already knew that the orchestra was going to be based on mostly like this old kind of like analog, kind of like dirty sound. And and yeah, we took it from there, and he liked that first cue. And that was really good because then we knew that okay, now we can kind of like build from there. and yeah, and then we started kind of like shuffling around with other cues, working in how to build to that moment. And the film got like different edits, right, as it was developing, the whole story was developing. So some of the scenes were actually pushing us for a different sound. So we were exploring how to do that without losing the identity that the score was already kind of like given to the film.
Mm-hmm.
So and yeah, it's just started that it was a lot of music, and I think we got into a lot of cool sounding cues that kind of like we all reacted really good to it, and we kind of like try to then towards the end trying to like keep it like organized, like, okay, let's stay with this kind of sound. We have a lot of sounds already that we have worked
Talk
on.
more
Let's kind of
about
like
these
keep it.
sounds. Talk more about like these music choices. The score is such an important part of the film, and
Yeah.
particularly in American Thief, I feel like you had to develop scores for each character. Like we're talking about the computer
Mm,
and all those interfaces with the sounds, and you had to really create like something organic that lived by
yeah.
itself. And this had to
Yeah.
really connect with the other scores of the other characters. I just want to talk, like, if you could just share like the music choices, the elements. How did you go about like building this, and how did it all connect?
Yeah. So there was going to be a lot of computer involved. So I remember Miguel telling me like, okay, we need to kind of like create this computer going nuts, kind of like a sound orchestra that exists. So so back then when I was doing my research in analog synthesizers, what I was doing is that I was using some analog synthesizers that I had with me, but I was tweaking them to kind of like in a more modern way, right? Like kind of like how that old 70s, 80s synthesizer will sound now, right? Like with the creative choices that we do now, right? We kind of like are way more crazier than maybe we were in the 80s or in the 70s. So so yeah, we were kind of like tweaking a lot of stuff. A lot of stuff was coming from scratch, like a blank canvas, and we were just putting a sound there and just tweaking them to the point that it felt right. And then that was kind of like our main I guess, color to it, and then we started building from there, right? So a lot of the cues started like that. They started with this kind of like weird sound that we totally loved, and then we started building from it, right? There's some cues that actually had those weird synths, but then we added an orchestra, kind of like in the background, right? So it's kind of like answering a little bit of how do we connect with the characters, right? We did have the element of what the story was about, but we also, well, it's kind of like a documentary, but also it had this elements that you needed to connect with the actors, right? With the characters. So and that's when it became challenging, because if it's a documentary, you kind of like have this kind of like third point view, right? Like you're the viewer and you're just kind of like presenting this kind of like emotional bed. But when you have the characters, and you need to be able to tell the audience how they, how are they feeling, right? And music is trying to help with that. So then it kind of like the weird synth orchestra, it starts kind of like shifting or changing into something different, right? So how to do that, uh, that it doesn't sound too abrupt, that was a challenging part. And 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 yeah, so we made a lot of synths. There was a lot of synths involved. I remember there was a cue that I worked on, a weird kind of like this adjusted kind of like drum sounds. I remember that we reacted really well to that, and we were actually deciding to kind of like go in that route, like using this kind of like weird percussion that sounds from afar, something like something is not locked, and I remember we tried some of those ideas and ended up in some of the cues, and I like that. It kind of like created this kind of like heaviness on the film. Um,
And that's what we
and
have. Like we have this really strong, heavy element in the music, and it's like throughout the whole film, which is great. Like I feel like it's a character itself, and I love all the work that you've done in it. And you just answer like there's so many different also musical like choices. Like I remember we did a trip hop song, a trap
yeah,
song. There's classicals. Can you just talk about all the
yeah,
different musics? Because yeah, I
yeah,
know there's like you put in the orchestra, you put in the drums, and you're such a talented artist because you end up using your
mm,
voice and all your instruments. But can you talk about
mm,
like how eclectic the film became at a certain point with all the musical choices.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Kind of like connecting with right being a documentary, quasi documentary, right? But then it has to also, in a way, the music needs to attach with the characters, right? Because there's also a story behind it. So, and that's where it kind of like made it easier to go into these different styles of music in a way. Still, those tracks, right, that were the trip hop one that we did, it still has that kind of like synthy sound. You know? So you can still feel that it's in the same language of what American Thief was kind of like doing pretty much from the prior cues. So so yeah, I think it helped out because it was just a part of you know, it was already again, the documentary kind of like going more into the emotional aspect of each character. It kind of like give us that little bridging to go there. And I'm trying to remember some of the other cues that we did,
A lot of
but
drums,
they're
a lot
a
of
lot of drum.
a lot of industrial sounding, like even rock,
Yeah,
like very Nine Inch Nails, I would say. Not Nine Inch
yeah.
Nails, but like Trent Reznor,
There
like
we go.
yeah,
There we go.
his like
That
that.
was a lot of
Yeah,
analog synths, which is kind of like what
yeah,
distinguish Trent Reznor and all that.
yeah. Can you talk about like these references, like reveal some of the references? Do you mind revealing some of the references that helped you score this film?
So yeah, definitely Trent Reznor. Not only as him as a film composer, which he's been more active as a film composer, but also as the work that he did in that he does with Nine Inch Nails. He's actually one of those few artists that do a lot of analog synthesizers in his music. The other one was I think back then Blade Runner um, was out, and it was another film that was heavily on synth. Uh, and when I mean Blade Runner, right, the newer version is because it's old, those old synths being used now, right, in 2000, whatever, 19 or 20, which is different to hearing the original Blade Runner in the 80s, I believe, or the 70s, the Vangelis score, which is it's treated differently, right? The ideas were different back then as the way that we will use it now. So I would say that those are like pretty much the two kind of like influences there. Obviously, I try to use it in my way.
Great.
It is a different film, and you know, so yeah.
So just I have one more question before we conclude it. Can you tell us what was your favorite part of the process, and also what was your worst part of the process?
Uh,
Start with the
I mean,
worst.
the worst. Well, I mean, not really. I mean, it's a there's a lot of changes that happen, but that's in any film, and you know, everybody's trying to you know, have a really good project out there. So, and that sometimes, you know, that could be a little bit overwhelming, right? If you're working already a lot in some other cues, but that happens all the time.
You're
So
being
that's
too kind. You're being too kind. It
so
was
that was fine. That was fine. What I liked about it is that it's a yeah, it's a learning process because of what
yeah,
I was just saying, you know, it's
definitely.
a lot of old synthesizers and how to treat them differently, right? I didn't want it to sound like Trent Reznor. I didn't want it to sound neither
Yeah,
like Vangelis, or, you know, it needed to have its own identity.
and it does.
And
It sounds like you. It sounds like the film. It sounds like it's the
yeah,
film. I can tell it's like you are the artist. Like I know there's a lot of you, a lot of your personality in the score. And I feel like it
yeah,
is like this for every single person that participated in this film, who collaborated in this film.
I
Like
agree.
myself as a writer producer, I can see myself in certain
Hmm.
scenes. So I
I
I,
agree. I
I
agree.
love that. I feel like we hit the spot. Yeah,
I agree. I agree.
yeah,
Totally agree,
yeah,
man. I think that's the part that takes the most because
yeah,
you do have that influence, but you also have to
yeah.
detach from it a lot and make your own way, you know. So
Thank you so much for doing this, Francis. It's been such a pleasure and wonderful that you could share these experiences. So thank you again, and we'll see you at the movies.
all right. Thank you for having me, man. Bye.